Welcome
Okay.
to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission. This is your gateway to insights and inspiration as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Apologize about being late. That is on me 100%. There's been some aggressive comments in the back here, so it's been awesome. As I am excited, I want y'all to be too. You should be doing the thing. You should be liking the show. You should be subscribing to the channel, hitting the notification bell, doing all that good stuff. Get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Wednesdays for the Gold Mine and Fridays for the Collective. This, of course, is a special edition New Year's. Happy New Year's, everybody. And I'm excited to get this started. We got Trav rejoining us. We got Seb rejoining us. Sean, I don't think we need intros. Y'all have been on more than enough. And interestingly enough, this is Seb's 100th episode. He has hit triple digits. If I had fireworks, I would give it to you. But let's get some thoughts on that, Seb. How does it feel to be 100?
I knew we were getting close because last time I asked you, I think we were at 96 or something, but I kind of lost track also. So it's kind of cool, just the timing of it. I'm super stoked to be here.
Almost like I planned it this way.
So
we're going to get into aggression is the topic today. And I just want to, as I was saying to Sean earlier, where this came from was I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about how kind of men and young boys have this natural aggression within them. And I said, I don't know if I really like that word. And he responded with, or we talked about it, and we said that, sometimes violence gets attributed to aggression in general. But I want to get guys' first thoughts on aggression in just as the kind of the word of the day. Travis, I'm going to hit you first.
Sure.
We got to go. What do you got?
Yeah, I think you're probably on the right track there from where my head would be anyways, defining what aggression means, because, there's a lot of people that would mistake assertiveness with aggression. There are women have a different label applied to them if they are more assertive or more aggressive. So I think having an understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about aggression is a good first step. And I think that young boys, like you're saying, might naturally be a bit more aggressive. I would say, why would we shy away from that term? Is it what negative connotations are we deriving from that? So that would be my initial thoughts. Obviously I got a bunch more, but I'm gonna pass Mike over here.
That's a good first start. Seb, what are you thinking?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is, after spending a lifetime using controlled aggression to do positive things, the first thing that comes to mind is what made the difference for me. And a lot of it had to do with context, intentionality, and outcomes. The three things that are critically important in deciphering whether or not the aggression is positive or it's harmful.
Again, I'm liking this where this is going already, Sean. What do you got?
Because it's an important subject, I scribbled down some quick notes, and I'm just going to rattle them off super fast. And what this will do, hopefully, is establish a baseline or some groundwork that we can launch off of the distinction between aggression and assertiveness. So here we go. Why even bother, by the way? Why even dwell on aggression or assertiveness? Because really what we're talking about is harnessing energy, harnessing your energy in a positive way. So here we go. Aggression versus assertion. Aggression is typically destructive, driven by anger or a need to dominate. Assertion is typically an expression of positive confidence, a calmness or distance from the situation. Aggression is typically one way. Assertion is typically two-way or a win-win. Aggression is typically negative. Assertion is less negative and generally positive. Aggression is necessary at times. Assertion, however, is a good gatekeeper of that aggressive state. Assertive equals confident, clear communication, direct, purposeful action without hostility or dominance. And finally, if you aren't comfortable with assertion, it's easy to build a 12-week plan moving you towards it. And how do you build that 12-week plan or 16-week plan or 8-week plan? I think by tuning into this conversation, you'll understand that we all can refine our understanding of aggression and assertion. And there are ways, there are plans, there are people who can help move you in the right direction.
I like that you brought that up, that there are people that can move you in the right direction. I was just thinking of that distinction. I didn't understand until I was an adult. Like what I had seen growing up from the adults around me as a child was that aggression was violence or anger, or there was an explosive element to anything aggressive. And that's what I saw up until I was an adult. And I actually saw people who could assert their position. And I think that's a really interesting point of just as you brought up earlier, Sean, the people around you and what you see growing up really applies to how you understand these things. I'm going to go around again. Travis, what are you thinking?
Yeah. I always had a very difficult time with the concept of aggression growing up. I didn't have a voice. My voice was beaten out of me when I was a child, and trying to interact with other kids around my age. I was always big. Like, I was taller than my teacher by grade 3, and that continued basically through to adulthood. I was 6'4", grade 7, size 14 feet. Like, I was just a big kid. So if I played sports, if I was interacting with other kids, I was always told, conscious of your size, you're a big guy. I mean, you'll intimidate people just by walking in the room. So you really got to be careful. So from a young age, I learned to be quiet and to be a lot more constrained and withdrawn. What that does is it'll give people, particularly people who have fragile egos, people who are not confident, it'll embolden them, and they'll say, "Look at that big guy over there. I wonder if I could take him." Well, he's not beaking off. He's not poking back at me, and I had a hard time with that testing process that all guys do, especially as kids, right? They'll poke back and forth. And consequently, I wouldn't poke back. It would be viewed as weakness. And when that escalated to something larger, then the fight would be on and they would lose, not because I'm a great fighter, but I'm a big guy, and it's just the odds are stacked in my favor. Growing up, when I was 17 years old, I got a job bouncing at a local nightclub. The Ozone nightclub. A guy was shot in the face, and the woman was found dead in the dumpster in the back, and they had a mass exodus of bouncers. So I came on, not even old enough to drink, but somehow they thought, this big guy, will have him work here. And I learned the interesting dynamic of aggression firsthand there, when people would start stepping up, and I don't want to fight. They get more and more aggressive. And I turn around and say, all right, fine, let's fight. And then the whole thing would settle down. And it became a game where I just played it back and forth, and just, it's easy to do when people are inebriated in the nightclubs. But you start to learn the power of controlled aggression and how you can use that, like Seb said, for a positive outcome. And the need as well to assert aggression in different ways. There's going to be psychological aggression, verbal aggression, physical aggression. I don't have to be physically aggressive just based on my size, but I do have to learn how to interact when the verbal jabs start coming back and forth, so that there's a proper balance of aggression when you're around other people who are, I guess, poking. So those are my my thoughts on that.
I like it. I like it a lot. Seb, what do you think on this?
Yeah, a lot of this I resonate with, just based on some of the events of my youth. But, for me as a kid that really didn't have it in him, or seemingly didn't, for many, many years, it's something that I fought vehemently, and I wasn't the only one. As it turns out, my mom fought it too. She was very quick to sort of tell me that, you could talk your way out of everything, that you could de-escalate everything, that you could, escape everything by using your words. And so I got really good at my words, but that really didn't save me all the time. And most of the time it actually didn't, because words resonate with people when they're ready to receive them. But if that's not the case, I don't care how well you articulate yourself as a 9-year-old, it's hitting a wall, right? And it was the same in sort of high school. Although in high school the tables have turned ever so slightly because I've regained control of that tailspin. But there were physiological changes and those types of things engage in that. But I think that it took me all the way to my high school years, like almost mid high school years, to realize that there was in fact power in being able to harness that. And also inherently what happens is when there's a lot of, say, childhood trauma and a lot of issues, eventually it grows in you like a fire. And if it isn't channeled properly, it's very destructive for you as a youth. And so I experienced this firsthand. So that before I could realize that I could use it for good, I was sort of lost, and I was kind of using it at random times, various outcomes with nefarious intent, sometimes even, almost like as a payback kind of thing. And so, it was a fine balance of trying to figure out what, when, where my balance was in relation to aggression and how I could muster it to do things in a positive way. And so it wasn't until probably grade 11 until I realized if I use this as fuel and direct it properly instead of trying to eliminate it, because clearly it wasn't going anywhere, I knew that then I could push myself into a direction that I wanted to go into with some level of conviction. And so that's where I started building a lot more self-confidence in relation to using aggression for, let's say, positive purpose.
I'm so digging this. Sean, what do you got?
Couple of things. I think that the distinction between aggression and assertion is best understood through practical application, of course. And you can read all the books in the world. You can start a company called Deconfliction Incorporated. As a genius academic, you can run programs on aggression, and you'll never understand it practically, but you will pull people down the yellow brick road of academia understanding. What made me say that, what made me think that, is what Travis said. And at a young age, he was put in a position where he got to observe the lab rats. He had the experiment in front of him as a 17-year-old bouncer. I mean, if anyone's ever bounced, in one single night, you get to see a lot of things. You get to see a lot of human interaction. You get to, depending on how nuanced your eye is, understand the world or not. And these kind of situations, if it's just one night, that's one night more than most people ever get. But if you're doing it night after night after night, if your job is bouncer or police or military or something that has you on the front line of something, on the front line of maybe a little bit of dodgy business, a little bit of danger, a little bit of fraught with issues. If you're on the front line, you get to see humanity for what it is. The veils kind of get removed and you get to see a more raw world. Now, whether there's alcohol involved or weapons involved, that actually isn't important. Getting in a position where you get a clearer read on actual people in confrontations, it is a lab where you're supposed to observe, where you're supposed to learn, where you're supposed to gain nuance for the future. Now, everyone on this panel has been in lots of situations where you've managed to gain that nuance. But as Trav said, and as Seb said, as young men, we don't have those skill sets. I wasn't bouncing at 17, but Trav was. And so he got a head start on the game. But because he started at 17 doesn't mean that he stayed in it for the rest of his life. And that's the good news. If you're just hearing for the first time that there's this game afoot called Get Better at Assertiveness, you're behind the 8 ball the moment that you think it's too late to get in it. But today you can start to become a student of it. You can start to better understand assertiveness and aggression by not just grabbing a book, but making some fists or tying on a white belt that will teach you physically how to get in the game of assertiveness. I know there's lots of programs out there. We know some people on the podcast that run programs about situational awareness and what to do, maybe as a woman, when you find yourself in a situation that you feel like aggression is being directed towards you. Well, all of these moments can be understood through the lens of turning one page on a book and having almost no understanding of what's happening, right through to understanding that situation better than the person who is being the aggressor. Where you are in life is a result of where you put yourself in life. None of this is an ambush or an accident when you consider the topic of aggression. If you know nothing about it, that's on you because you didn't prioritize understanding it. So listening to this conversation today, if you haven't more deeply dug into the difference between aggression and assertion, this should be a trigger for you to consider digging deeper.
Yeah, be a good place to start. That's for sure. I wonder. You made me think about this. That perhaps the drive, the aggressive drive that's within us, is the natural kind of desire to see the ragged edge, to get to that front line, like you're talking about, to be able to. And I think that drive, I think, comes and goes. But I don't know if everybody has it. This is the thing that keeps triggering the back of my head. Is I don't know if everybody has that aggressive drive. Whereas I think all of us have a drive within us to do things, but I don't know if everybody does.
Yeah, but because it's being treated as a nicety, like you trip over your own aggression shoelace and discover it for the first time. Like, oh, that's what aggression is. Maybe this will be handy. That's not the way anyone is supposed to understand aggression. We are supposed to be today explaining the importance of understanding aggression. We are supposed to be explaining to everyone out there today why you need to embrace assertiveness. Because if we don't say it, who will? And so I know everyone needs to pick it up, what we're putting down. If you don't have an assertive bone in your body, today's the day to start calcifying an assertive bone. And so this is, to me, this is not a optional situation where someone shrugs their shoulders and says, I'll deal with assertiveness next year. This should be a subject in high school, as far as I'm concerned.
Seb, you got anything on this?
Yeah, there's two things that fundamentally come to mind for me. First of all, have you ever noticed when people start being more assertive with their boundaries, how often they will be overly aggressive when they do so? So they will, because this is a very stressful prospect for them. It's very difficult to do. They've never really done that. So now it's almost like I'm going to bring to bear the most amount of aggression that I possibly can to establish this boundary. When not really, it's assertiveness that you need, not an overwhelming amount of aggression, because that changes relationships. It's a breach of trust to the people around you, because you can assert boundaries, and if the people around you are the right people, they will respect those boundaries. If those people are not here and choose to not respect those boundaries, they shouldn't have been around you in the first place. And so now you're determining who are in your circle is in line with what you are doing and respectful of those boundaries. And so I see that a lot when people never had boundaries in their life, and everybody walked them over like a welcome mat, and all of a sudden they start producing a person that's capable of establishing some boundaries. But as soon as it happens, it's often done sort of in an over aggressive manner. And now you have to have the chat that says, listen, you can assert those boundaries. You don't need to overcompensate when you do it, because you're coming out with aggression in anticipation of a negative response that you are going to get from somebody in front of you. And the fact that you're managing a little bit of stress, because let's call a spade a spade. If you've never established boundaries, it is a stressful prospect when you first do it, especially if everybody around you has gotten used to wiping their feet on you. And I mean that metaphorically. Sometimes those are family members, you know, they just threw you around for the last 27 years. And now you decide that, you know, no, actually, I will put my foot down on that. And so let me do it with the most amount of aggression possible to make sure that any rebuttal is going to be nipped in the bud. And of course, that is not how this works. It works, you know, quite the other way. And so I think striking that balance is a real difficult thing. Another piece that that Sean mentioned that you know I really buy into is the process of sanitization of aggression, or is how people view aggression. So if you have never been truly on the wrong side of it, you are going to construct a utopian idea of what aggression is like, and how and what your capacity or ability to deal with essentially anything is going to be like. That's like saying, oh bro, I'll just see red and I don't need any of those, you know, skills to do anything, because I'll just see red and I'll bail myself out. But the reality is it's quite evident if you look at when aggression in a physical realm, or in a physical sense, sort of starts anywhere, in a restaurant or in a public venue or anything, watch everybody playing catch up. And I can guarantee you that there are some people in there that are familiar with aggression that still cannot play catch up fast enough to meet the person where they are and stop an assault or an attack or whatever the case might be, or even step up to defend somebody. You know, I think that most people are ill prepared for it, even if they have been exposed. If the time frame between them realizing and processing what's happening and them responding, the event is generally over. So you'll see a lot of people not do anything. And then you'll see people that completely freeze because they have zero idea what to do when somebody is aggressive or when somebody is physically, and there's multiple realm, of course, there's multi-dimension to aggression, but I'm using you know, physical aggression as an example here. And so the process of sanitization, it's an insidious thing, because what it actually does is it makes you feel good. It makes you feel good because you're not overwhelmed by the thoughts of what might be or what could be and what you might have to do, and the realization that you are ill prepared for what it is that you might be facing. So it's a good way to put your proverbial head in the sand, so to speak, you know, kind of like an ostrich, like nothing will happen. We're good. You know, it's Canada or it's whatever you are. It really doesn't matter where you are. But the issue with that is preparing for something that has a very low likelihood of happening, but very catastrophic consequences, is one of the hardest things to get human to do. That's why it's difficult to get cops to train in jiu-jitsu. That's why it's difficult to get, you know, because there's going to be an overwhelming amount of exposure that occurs as a result of you preparing for that day that will make you feel not so great. You know, once you've had a bunch of Div 1 purple belt 235-pound wrestlers on your side for the last 4 years, and not to bring jiu-jitsu in the mix, but it could be boxing, it could be anything, I don't care. It could be anything. Now you have to acknowledge the prospect that might be a possibility for you, and you have to be preparing for that. And that's the part that's difficult, because it actually beats you down. It doesn't really build you up. It takes time to build you up, and so you're going to get beat down a lot before your sense of self-worth and self-confidence and assertiveness is increasing to a point where you're now managing these types of encounters, or even these thoughts in a more positive and constructive way.
Well, you're talking about a learning process. You're talking about someone engaging in their own learning process. And so if someone can't engage in their own learning process, it's our job to engage them in that learning process. And I found that someone who is overly aggressive, and I'm going to define overly aggressive as unnecessarily negative emotions being attached to their intention that they are going to try to make happen. Usually these kind of things come from someone who lacks confidence And because they lack confidence, that's driven from lack of action. So if you aren't a person of action, then you haven't developed enough confidence. And if you don't have enough confidence, then you are probably default over aggressive. Action is a refining process within your life. The more action you engage in, the more refinement you can perceive. I said you can perceive. I didn't say you will perceive. Because action also requires an attendance of attention. You have to be in your own game of action. You have to study yourself as you are action-oriented in life. And by study, I mean in the moment, as things are going sideways. You've got to understand what's going on by literally being mindful and observing and feeling and knowing the moment. And then after the fact, you've got to reflect on it to learn the deeper lessons, to evolve faster. And so, if you are constantly in default aggression in a negative way, it's probably coming from a lack of confidence through a lack of action. That can all be changed. That's the best message out of anything that we'll say to date, I feel, on this particular episode, is wherever you're at right now, it's all adjustable. And by the way, it's adjustable in the positive and it's adjustable in the negative, depending on who you align with and how you orient your mindset.
Trav?
Yeah, if I was new to this and I was just stepping in and watching this episode, one way that would help me understand would be you've got a line. If you keep getting pushed over that line, you're a pushover. People take advantage of you. If you hold that line, you're assertive. You've got your line you can assert. And if you push over that line, you're aggressive. That'd be one way that I would look at it. And I think it's important for people to push their boundaries. A man's reach should exceed his grasp, less what's heaven for, to quote, was it Robert Browning? But we need to be pushing if we want to grow. How that aggressiveness comes out can be in sports. We can get aggressive and we can build ourselves and our team up in a positive way. It can be due to a fragile ego, and that's usually based in fear. We're afraid of being found out that we have a fragile ego. We're afraid that someone's going to challenge us, so we're going to push a little bit further so that they don't push us. I like Seb's comment about changing your circle. And if you are the type of person who's new to asserting yourself or pushing your pushing or being a bit more aggressive, the people that you surround yourself with, we're all humans, we're all creatures, we all take the path of least resistance. People will typically remember the version of you that they could understand the best, that would be the most beneficial to them, that they could manipulate the best, perhaps. And if you find that you're being assertive is now creating a situation where there's friction and you've got to now be hyper aggressive in order to try and establish some sort of a boundary, maybe these aren't the right people that you should be hanging around with. Because looking at Seb and listening to his childhood, he's probably very much like me. I didn't want to fight people. I didn't want to get in fights, but I got in a lot of fights. And that was because I wasn't asserting myself. And I guess I kind of liken it to, you watch these videos of tourists going through a national park and they'll see a wild animal and they'll go up and they'll start petting the animal, and the animal doesn't growl at them and it doesn't make any sort of obvious outward indications that it's going to be aggressive with them. And all of a sudden they get too close and the animal bops it away and everyone says, look at that terrible animal, we got to put that animal down. I mean, that's sort of how I likened my childhood. So I think if I understood the the idea that aggressiveness is actually a very positive thing if done with positive intention and for a positive outcome. That would have probably saved me a number of years on my learning curve.
I agree. I went through some very similar things to what you guys are talking about. You know, being a big kid, that does happen quite a bit. The one thing that really I found interesting on this was that I heard this a little while ago, was that boundaries are personal actions. They're not external things. Like, I can't set a boundary somewhere else and be like, you can't do this, or I don't want you to do that. It is, if this happens, I will do this. And then I will do that thing whenever that happens. The challenge is, I think you have to aggressively seek that. I think this is where it becomes interesting, is because the idea for me now on aggression is that it's almost like a velocity scaler for me. Is that if I really want to do something quickly, then I need to dial up the aggression. I'm going to go after that at a much higher rate.
You need to dial up the assertion.
The assertion, yes, thank you. I appreciate that. But when I was younger, it was the level of like violence that I could engage versus
you needed to dial up your negativity.
Yeah. Okay. Expand on that.
Well, I'm using your words. I could keep correcting your aggression and your assertiveness choice of words, but if you are using aggressive as a youngster and assertive as an adult, when you were a youngster, you were dialing up your negativity. As an adult, you're dialing up your positivity. Am I misunderstanding?
No, that's correct. I just
okay. And it's the reason I'm simplifying that, and the reason I'm drawing it out is because it's an important distinction. It goes back to what I was trying to state at the start of the podcast: is the word you choose defines your life. So choose one of the words, aggression or assertive. Now, that's so simplistic, but that will get a person heading in the generally right direction. I love aggression, man. I think aggression is a negative tool that you can use positively, but you've got to learn to wield it. You've got to learn to not be hanging on to the negative energy too long. But let's make no bones about it. I think every human has some aggression in them, and it's how much you want to deploy in the moment. Now, if we dial back the negative connotation of aggression and tweak it just a little bit, let's call it aggression is now partially negative, but it's more about dominating. That just described the infantry. I mean, take that ground and dominate it. And that isn't with rose petals and unicorns. That is with full-blown aggression. And is that negative? I'm not sure. Is it dominating? Hell yeah, it is. So you got to have some of it in you to make sure certain things get done. But it's recognizing how much of that bandwidth to deploy and when to shut that grid down. Because you can't be aggressive all your life. And that is the problem. In fact, Chance and Travis, you both described part of societal's larger problem, which is this. Well, he's a big guy. When we moved into town here in Roslyn a few years ago, not too many people knew me, but they were starting to hear a little bit about me. And a dude walked up to me and said, "Hey, if you had to fight this guy and this guy, would you?" And what he'd done is he cherry-picked the two quote-unquote biggest guys in the town. And I said, "Why would I do that?" And he said, "Well, I'm just curious how you would stack up against them." And I said, "Is it for fun? Or is it for to save the planet? Is it for life or death?" And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Is it life or death, or are we in a sport?" And he said, life or death. And I said, "What's the current population of Roslyn right now?" And he made a guess. And I said, "Well, strike 2 off of that population and start digging 2 holes." And he looked at me and he couldn't believe I'd said it out loud. That is an interesting moment in history for me that I've hung on to, because he'd asked a question and I'd given him the cold hard facts. but he wasn't prepared for it, because the idea of aggression is kind of ephemeral. It's almost, again, that academia of, well, if he's a big guy, he's the big man in town, and he is aggression defined. And we all know that that isn't true. Some of the smallest guys are some of the most lethal guys and are some of the most aggressive guys. And in fact, I'll go so far as to say the small man syndrome, the small man mentality, will often provide a more negative aggression than a big man who is more comfortable with his size and is more comfortable with bopping people on the head and doesn't have quite as much negativity. I find it interesting that the big man mentality is almost defined as aggression, but they would be less aggressive than the small man mentality. What do you guys think?
Small man syndrome is a big thing. Travis, what do you got?
Oh, I agree. I mean, you look at it in kids' sports. The big guy will be sitting there, hold back, careful. You don't want to hurt them. The small person, come on, go get him. Come on, show him. And everyone be cheering the small person on because society wants to help those that are smaller and weaker up. And there is a leveling process where they also, I mean, if that person's way up there, we kind of want to bring them down a little bit and have a bit of a level playing field. And it's the same in animals. You look at dogs, right? Little yappy dogs that are yapping off and biting everybody, and people encourage that. The big dogs will get put down if they bark or growl out of fear of what they might be able to do. It is an interesting dynamic, and it's obviously, I've lived it. I've seen it. Being a big guy, people get this idea as to what I'd be like, and maybe I've overcompensated in the other direction, or maybe that's naturally who I am. I'm going to be the person who's not overbearing or pushing myself onto others. But when push comes to shove, I'm not backing down, and that size is helpful at that time.
Yeah, it 100% is. And it's interesting when you're a lot bigger than other kids that you're around, you do get told that quite a lot. No, just be gentle, be gentle. Don't go too hard too much, because you can hurt smaller people pretty easily when you're younger, and it is a challenge. Seb, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I think it's a really fine balance, because you can actually really run some serious damage on a big kid, by subduing them like this, and I think that it's important to make the distinction, just be aware that when you do something, it has a kinetic and physiological impact, that's greater than another person. But also, I don't expect you to be, to be pushed over and all of those things. So they need to acquire the exact same skills, because unfortunately you see it. I had a friend like this. So I worked at clubs as well. I was 18 at the time, and this was between the biker wars, between the Rock Machine, the Hells Angels. It was a crazy time to be in the clubs. And a friend of mine was a massive monster. He had, a chest all the way here, and he was just an absolute savage. But he'd been subdued so much by not only his father, but other people in his life, including teachers and whatnot, that he was the shell of somebody that would have been 5'2" and 110 pounds. And he had zero self-belief. He was self-deprecating to a absolute eviscerating level, and there was absolutely nothing that kept him in that job for any length of time, because he just couldn't do it. He didn't have the self-confidence to do it. Yet he had the gift of the gab and all the tools required to do what he could have done, but he just didn't have the self-belief that he could. And I think that was an absolute tragedy, because when I transitioned into policing, that's something that he had been doing, that he had been wanting for years, but he had never had the courage to embark on it, because again, that subduance of his personality, of his character traits, of his bodily activity and everything that he did, created a shell of a human being with absolutely no capacity for establishing boundaries, no capacity for stepping in for anything, no capacity for. So it was just a very tragic story. But I also think that, and we're still in the physical realm and all that, and there's so many more realms that we can be discussing. But think about the 80s or the 70s, 80s, and this was the time where, size was everything for everybody, everybody, so it was a very different time, when you start looking at the times now. All that being said, if you were in a physical standpoint, and again, just to make a bit of a nuance, if you were to take say 2 UFC fighters, and we're talking about fighting here, and it's not all about fighting, but we're talking about something that's easy to comprehend and something that's easy to picture. If you take 2 UFC fighters at the same skill level, the bigger one wins. That's a fact, so we understand that it's more there is a lot of discrepancy between what was anticipated from people fighting in the 80s versus what it is now, with all of the training and all of the popularization of mixed martial arts and all of these things. So now we have a different view of that, and those of us who have been engaged in this world for a long time understand that. But I think we just need to be, I think that self-awareness piece in relation to how we weaponize our tools, including our self-confidence, including our ability to establish boundaries, is a critical piece. If I'm having a conversation with my wife and I establish a boundary and I do it with a certain amount of conviction, that's okay. If I do it with a little bit too much conviction, that is violence against my spouse, and we can argue this all day, but I don't think that's an argument. Like if there is a little bit too much aggression in there, now it's violence, and so really having the ability to be sort of self-aware and self-regulate, and that's going to be very difficult if you've never toyed with the concept of aggression or assertiveness. But those are things that, cautionary tales, so to speak.
I'm truly digging where we're going with this, because I think it's a really important subject in general just to get into. And I have some comments on here I want to touch on and some questions, but for anybody got any thoughts before we jump into these?
I got lots of thoughts, but let's hit the comments.
Raj, let's do it. Okay, so we got Celtic McWalks jumped on here. Good to see you, Mick. He says, I don't believe in aggression. I haven't learned more from people who demonstrate calmness and thoughtfulness, or I have learned more from people who demonstrate calmness and thoughtfulness that people who are very aggressive can't deal with. Which, interesting, because we kind of touched on that earlier. We got the Paradoxia official on the Instagram side says here, the mama bear mentality. It's interesting. It is innate, but when conditioned to be nice, creates confusion, which I think is a great point. She says, things in society will get as bad as they need to get people to understand this concept of assertion. Unsafe streets didn't do it. Women being murdered on subway, safety will continue to decline. And this is the point I wanted to get to, was to test humanity in what they're willing to allow to be done to them. This is the key, I think, is that aggression and assertion applies to what we're willing to allow to happen at the very root of it. You guys got any thoughts on that? Trav, I'm gonna hit you first.
Yeah, it's our boundary. It's our. I mean, you can put yourself into an arena of hyper aggressive people and find that that's now the norm, and that's not considered aggression anymore. You can put yourself into an arena full of a lot of people are easy to push over, a bunch of betas, and find that your assertiveness is now being viewed as aggression. So it's your life, it's your reality, as Sean likes to say, it's your program that you're going to run. Who are you going to run it with? So if your competitive nature is being viewed as aggression because of the circles that you're running in, maybe it's time to change those circles.
Seb, thoughts?
Yeah, especially if those circles are watching a woman burn in the subway. I mean, those are the type of things that will keep me up at night, and it literally has. There has been a severe increase in these types of events, and we've seen it all over the world. And the propensity is more about not doing anything than it ever was. And I think that's a very, very dramatic, it's a very catastrophic issue that I'm not sure I have an answer to, but we definitely, something's got to change in what way. I have no idea. So it's just spitballing right now. But I think it's important that we look internally and we have those lines set in the sands for ourselves. What are you willing to let go? Because the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And so if we're standing there and we haven't prepared preemptively to interfere with something like that, you're likely not to have Hicks law is going to kick in and you are going to stall instead of acting when the time comes. And so let's take it from the people that have never dealt with assertiveness or aggression, have never had to deal with it, never had to muster it, never had to channel it. And let's step into, the people that are familiar with it and have toyed enough with it to know that they're capable of it and use it in a way that's constructive in terms of outcome. And now let's dial it up a bit and say, when was the last time I had to interfere with anything? And what is the prospect of this occurring right now in this day and age? And what am I going to do if such is the case? Am I prepared physiologically, mentally, emotionally in advance so that I don't encounter these critical stalls when things happen? And again, we're talking about physical aggression again, right? Like it's just I don't know why I'm being drawn to this, potentially because it was such a big part of my life. But I do believe that we need to be prepared to step up as men, and we need to be prepared to step up not only for our families and for ourselves, but for the people around us and for the community in general. Now, there's also a concept which is, a concept that if we had 20 people stepping in a situation, would need a lot less aggression from one person, so the community and the collective actually acting together in unison, using their brains to make something happen, is also a critical piece of that operation. And so having the ability to predict and anticipate having to do something like this, having to muster people around you, having to try to lead. And we take an example like, say, Flight 93, for example, Pennsylvania, or I believe it was Pennsylvania. At some point, somebody stood up and said, "Hey, guys, we need to be stopping this, or else this is going to go sideways for a bunch of people, including ourselves." And so, I think it is those are very precarious times that we live into right now, and I believe that there is a certain subset of society that's very, very capable and has demonstrated the ability to use gratuitous violence in a variety of different settings. And there's another subset of society that would have not only the moral responsibility, but also the capacity to do something that don't. And so just reconciling those two is going to be an interesting challenge.
We live in some interesting times. I wrote down here, interesting enough, that you said we have to step up in those certain circumstances. But I think also, to apply this to other aspects in life, not just the physical violence portion of it, is that you have to be willing to step up in those moments for anything. If I wanted to join the military, I still had to step up to that decision and actually do it. I still had to go through with the paperwork and all that other stuff, and then physically get on the bus and go. So I think this is an interesting
difference. Part. There's a difference. You were stepping up to the unknown.
Yeah.
There's a difference between stepping up to the unknown and stepping up to the diabolical that you do know. So aggression to the unknown is easy. Aggression against the known is far more difficult. And so on the daily, I would suggest that there's a lot of people out there that are facing the known in their life that is way more difficult than stepping on a bus to head off to the unknown basic training. It's an important distinction. And the aggression applied against the known in my world is far more worthy than someone who is applying aggression against the nebulous void in front of them. It's facing the known versus facing the unknown is a interesting moment for most people. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, or one is, I don't know, one is more courageous than the other. I'm not making that proclamation. What I am saying is there's a distinction between facing the known and the unknown. I'd like to go back to something that was stated. I think it was Paradoxia Official, the mama bear energy. Let's just touch on that for a sec. I think the term can be used in a positive way, but it's mostly used in a negative way. And let me define that. But what I mean by in a negative way, I mean in a ill-educated way. I've seen lots of comments out there about how someone's going to deploy their mama bear energy and they wouldn't be able to fight their way out of a wet paper bag. And so at what point did that mama bear energy turn into Wonder Woman Marvel outcomes? In someone's mind, that's the case, but in practical reality, that is not how life unfolds. So by proclaiming that someone is ready to deploy their mama bear energy doesn't superpower them up. It's the same person, just with the intention that they're going to produce an outcome that they're probably not capable of. I like mama bear energy when it's backed up by skill sets, when it's backed up by they know what they're capable of, when the outcome is produced by confidence through experience rather than guesswork and happenstance. These are two radically different things. And so mama bear energy, let's call it defending your family, producing good outcomes for those that are close to you, etc. That's all really possible. But I think that more often than not, when that term is thrown out, it's delusional. It's simply a term that makes someone feel good about their trajectory in life, but it isn't pressure tested. What do you guys think about that?
Trav, what do you got?
A bunch of thoughts, actually. Just to touch on both what Seb was saying, what Sean was saying. And you as well, Chance. We live in interesting times. You look at the preponderance of weak people and this woke cancel culture and this idea that we have to be some sort of a homogenous blob that can be ineffectual. I don't think weak people want to feel weak. I think they want to feel strong, and they've got a couple of options. They can go to the gym, they can go to the library, they can increase their mental strength, their emotional strength, their physical strength, they can go do jujitsu, martial arts, whatever it might be, or they can tear down those around them. They can make their building big by tearing down all the buildings around them. So I've watched that for the last 10 years or so. Seb, when you mentioned that there's more and more of these violent events that have been happening, and I question, one, is there more, or are we seeing them more? Because we have the ability to see what's going on. I don't doubt that there are more things happening. I just don't have that empirical evidence. But if there are more happening, it's probably because we've kind of put being weak on a pedestal, being homogenous on a pedestal, bring down those who would have a strong voice and use, when it was mentioned what 20 people can get together. Well, that's what a lot of people did. That's what cancel culture was all about. We'll just get in there, all the voices, and we're going to bring you down because we disagree with this one thing that we saw you do, without doing due diligence and without looking at all the different facts that are happening out there. And Jordan Peterson says that being weak doesn't make you a good man. Being a savage that can show constraint and restraint makes you a good person. One just means you can't do anything. The other one says you're fully capable, but you're a good person and you're able to hold that back. And to build off of what Sean was saying, and an old cliche saying, an armed society is a polite society. I mean, there's a reason why countries have nukes, right? All of a sudden, okay, now that's on the table. Our negotiations will be a little bit different when we're talking here. But it doesn't necessarily mean we have to be armed with weapons. We can be armed with knowledge. We can be armed with physicality, knowing that we can actually use our bodies and our minds and our emotions in a way that will achieve a positive outcome in an aggressive way, so we don't have to use it. Those are my thoughts.
This kind of ties back into confidence all around, is that, you know, you have to have confidence in the skills that you have, or the sacrifices that you've made to get to the point that you are, because that the sacrifices are either in time or training or physical sacrifices, whatever it is, in order to get to a skill level in whatever it is we're talking about, to be able to have the confidence to set those boundaries and be willing to back them up. Whether that be physical or emotional or anything, because all of this takes training and time, which then builds confidence, which then allows you to set boundaries, which then allows you to kind of carry this train on. I'm finding it very interesting to kind of go all the way around here. We got a couple other comments, and then I think we can do some final thoughts for the day. We got one. This one, actually, we're going to get some thoughts on this first. Hold on a second. The River Viking jumps in here. He says, CQC 2007, Battle School, bayonet attack, defend. Sergeant picks biggest guy against only female. She was max aggression. He was not. Sergeant cleaned his clock. They fought again. It lasted 15 seconds. Here it is. The second portion of this is that the sergeant cleaned the big guy's clock for being not aggressive, and then put him back in against her. It lasted 10 seconds. What are your guys' takeaways from this? Sean, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
Well, if I understand it correctly, generally the scene was big guy, small girl, guy held back. He got jacked up by the sergeant. He went in and then, took care of business, and it didn't last very long. And I suppose my thoughts are, I'm not surprised. And it's these are baseline observations. So I'm thinking apples to apples. The male and the female were equally skilled with a bayonet at the end of their rifle. They'd both attended the same training. They were both on the same day of basic training. And so now we're just talking about gender and size. And so I don't necessarily think male, female in this situation, one would be more aggressive than the other by fact of their chromosomal. I'm not saying that. What I am simply going to state is, if you're 110 pounds versus 250 pounds, the law of physics will sort a lot of stuff out. And so the real crux of the question is, why did he hold back? Why did the large male hold back in that moment? And he probably thought, I'm just imagining his mind, he probably thought that he was being honorable, that he was doing the right thing, quote unquote. And maybe I'm going to go so far as to say he might have thought that he was expected to do the right thing. And how did he come to that conclusion? How in that moment did he decide that that was the right play? Because for sure, in that moment, and I've seen the moment a handful of times, for sure that big guy probably, as he was stepping in, was thinking, I don't want to screw this up. I don't want to embarrass my regiment. I don't want to embarrass ... So it wasn't for lack of trying to do the right thing. But the conclusion that he chose wasn't perhaps the right conclusion. So how did he get to that point? Where was the psychology that got him to that point? And I would maybe argue that he did the right thing as expected of him, rather than having his own agency, understanding that, oh, we're about to scrap? Well, a scrap is a scrap, and this is the way it's going to be. You're going to get it. That probably wasn't his thought. So he defaulted to the niceties, and then eventually he realized that he had to default to the realities. That's my thought.
I like that. Seb, any thoughts?
Yeah, man, this is a very, very complex situation, and we're lacking a lot of information, as far as I'm concerned, because we don't know. This guy may have had a natural propensity to be protective of women. He may have felt that he couldn't win because if he won, he would have been, ostracized for winning. And if he didn't, he would have been, there's a variety of different things. And it's easy to stand here and go, but then I have questions about the sergeant that takes it so personally that he doesn't go hard with the female, and he decides to bring his own ego in the game to do this. So maybe he's trying to prove that, hey, listen, maybe he had a point to prove, or maybe he wants everybody to know that female in combat are expected to perform the same task. But there's middle grounds to all of this. He could have had a conversation with that guy and say, hey, man, I know that you're potentially trying to protect her, but in order for us to have a team that's solid, we need to trust that she's capable of doing things. So is there a way that we can kind of meet midway and you go and do the thing? Like there is a lot of information missing. And so I just see it as a pissing contest, which is very, very common in the military circles. It just is. And I don't know that it has a whole lot of value. I don't know that anybody is staking a whole lot out of that, but I would love to know what the underlying reasons for that were. Anyways, I'll move on to two things I'd like to address.
Well, just before we move on, Seb,
yeah.
The important thing that you just said is that was a missed opportunity. Mm-hmm. So River Viking, I'm sure he's probably solved the question in his own mind years ago about that moment. But with you saying what you've said, with all of us saying whatever we're going to say about that moment, there will be something new, something novel that's stated today for River Viking for him to review that moment. That was a missed opportunity by the training sergeant. That was a missed opportunity by the group. That was the missed opportunity between the two individuals to talk about it after the fact in the locker room or in the squad bay room or in the shacks where everyone gets to reflect on the moment and learn from it. I bet there was a ton of learning that could have come out of that. But knowing generally how those moments play out, none of those lessons were imparted because no one took the time to nuance the lessons.
Trav, you got any points on this?
Yeah, there's no right answer on this one. I mean, a lot of the things that were said are very, very true, but the person was in a no-win situation. Yeah, you can make a very positive training experience out of it on one hand and teach one specific set of values or lessons, or you could do the complete opposite. You could train the individual that, yes, we all have to be a team and they have to recognize that you're capable and they have to trust that you're going to go all out. And the other side can say, well, they got to trust that you're not going to go overboard and that you can constrain yourself. So depending on what the learning outcomes are in this one, you can take so many different paths. You can then turn it around and say it's something else. So I would say find the learning outcomes that you're hoping to get out of that one and double down on that. But ensure everybody also knows that this isn't the one and only way. This is a path forward. I mean, you can train people to be just rabid dogs ready to shoot at anything and punch and hit anything that comes their way. And you can take those exact same people. And I know because I've trained them, and you can make them so fearful of legal repercussions or what society might think that they'll never draw a gun. They'll never enter into the altercation. So it's a really, really difficult balance to find that median line, both for the individual who's being trained so that they're going to be effective, for the person who's doing the training so that they have a cohesive outcome, and for, let's say, the department so that they have something that's defendable, articulatable at a later date. You put two different people at different sizes. Years ago, doing jiu-jitsu way back in the day, I remember there's a fellow 5th Dan black belt, and everyone's like, oh man, this guy is so well experienced. I bet he could take this big guy down over here, Trav. So we go into the ring, and I'm beginning, learning, don't know what's going on, and this guy was well experienced, but just given his genetics, the second I was able to get him within my grasp, it was over. And I won, he lost. I'm no great jiu-jitsu person, but I had size on my side. It's a no-win situation. If the person who's really well experienced went in and loses, that looks bad on him. If he wins, well, of course he wins. He's well experienced. I don't see this as an ultimate win on either side.
Going into situations that are both negative, I like this.
Yeah, unless the big guy and the 5th Dan black belt guy both sit around in the ring after the fact and both learn the nuance of the moment, both grow out of the moment. The 5th Dan black belt who quote unquote lost, he totally lost if he didn't grow in the moment. So, winning and losing is a term that is thrown around as you lost the fight, you won the fight. But there's more to winning and losing a fight. There's winning in life and losing in life. And that's the grander game. The tiny little blips on the radar, whatever, man. It's all the blips together. That's the win or loss.
It reminds me of the bell curve. That you kind of want to, where do you want your bell curve to kind of sit on your trajectory of your life as a whole, rather than any one particular moment? It's quite interesting. I got one last couple last comments, and then we can shut her down for the afternoon. River Viking hits us up. Thanks for your comments on this. I wanted to get high level thoughts, generate different reflections about the instance, exactly how you responded. The outcome was combatants are the same. XX or XY doesn't matter. Yeah, absolutely. John Minari jumps on here. He says, better the warrior in the garden. I'm grateful to have had strong mentors in my youth to help me channel aggression. Aggressive nature can be harmful. The mental battle was controlling aggressive impulses in the moment of anger. In maturity, it's nice to know that it's readily available in the toolbox when needed. Exactly. This is an interesting point because it is way easier to rein a horse in when you're riding than it is to get them to go, right? So you want to have that confined level of aggression. I think this is awesome. So first off, thank you guys. This has been an absolutely outstanding conversation, and I just can't thank you enough. This has been awesome. Seb, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, just two things I wanted to touch back on. Travis brought the prospect of having countries being armed a certain way to get to, well, being in international security myself and having done a whole bunch of research in that field, we know that the Cold War probably avoided nuclear disaster. And a lot of people don't know that. But just the way the posturing was going on, it was quite evident to everybody that nobody wins if we do something. If there is in international relationship, often there, and I won't get into the sort of technical side of it, but there are things that if a country is looking at a country that's easily taken over, they can easily decide to do that because that's the right thing to do as far as they're concerned. So there is nuances in everything. So it's important to understand. And it's funny because when you ask somebody, do you think there's any benefit in having nukes? I mean, no, if you take them all out, we're looking at a different prospect, but unfortunately that's utopian. That's not going to happen. So that's the one thing. The other thing is we never responded to that fella that was saying, I don't believe in aggression, but not believing in aggression is like not believing in the sun. It is there and it is there for the taking and for being used and channeled properly. What you referred to in terms of calmness and poise and controlled aggression, that is somebody that has experience with aggression. Because generally speaking, the loudmouth and the people that are yapping and being overly aggressive and everything have very little experience with aggression. Aggression and assertiveness, when done at an expert level, is very calm and it's very unsettling. Hence why Bruce Lee used to say, "Be mindful when you think I'm sleeping." And that's why we know that the person that's yapped the loudest in the crowd is generally not the one you need to be worried about. Okay, but it's the same in the tactical world. When you see guys, that are one with their weapon systems, that move, talk, breathe it, it's very calm and very controlled. Whereas when you see people overcompensating, it tends to be people that have a lot less operational experience. And so I just bring a little nuance for you here. Aggression definitely is a tool. It does exist and it can be beneficial, but you are absolutely correct that controlling chaos requires a calm and poised demeanor.
Yeah, absolutely. Travis, what do you got?
not for people not to be afraid of exercising aggression, and aggression comes in a bunch of different forms, but to be mindful of the intention behind that aggression, where it's coming from. Is it coming from a positive place for positive change, or is it coming from a fearful place, a negative place, or a place of fragile ego? So that would, yeah. Aside from that, I think the main points have been pretty much covered.
Love it. Sean, final thoughts?
Two things. One, coming off of what Seb just said, and he is correct, that in order to be calm, poised, calculated, you need to have some experience. And that experience probably comes out of having some common sense slapped into your head with a slap. If you haven't faced violence, then you can't display violence. If you haven't been slapped, you can't slap. This is the way of life. To understand force, you've got to have deployed force, and you've also got to have force deployed against you. These are not academic understandings. These are practical understandings. And it's not a one and done, by the way. That fight that you had in grade 6, where you beat up someone or someone beat up you, and that was your one and done, you don't understand violence and you don't understand aggression versus anything else. You've got to be in the game on a pretty regular basis. And I don't mean that you've constantly got to be out and running gun battles on the streets in front of your shopping mall. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you've got to be touching something to do with aggressiveness or something to do with assertion. You choose which path you want, but you've got to get your fingers in the pie. You've got to be involved in it. You can't stand back and look at it like it's an academic equation. You've got to touch it. You've got to be involved in it. If you want to understand guns, you've got to be smelling gun oil. You can't read about the smell. You've got to have the smell in your nose. That is experiencing it. I'm going to throw one more thing out there. And this happened just yesterday when I was out on my Fat Tar ride. I was up at the tree suffering, cracking out my knucks. Some dude was there after I finished, and he looked at me. I still had my ski goggles on, or my riding goggles, and all he could see was kind of a little bit of white, and the rest of me is all covered up. And he looked at me and he pointed at me and he said, "Are you Sean?" I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "I rolled with you in 2019. I said, "Where?" And he said, "Here in Rossland. I just started going to BJJ. You kicked my ass." And I said, "Well, I probably did it in a way that you learned something, right?" And he said, "Yeah, no, I loved it." And I said, "Well, what happened to you?" And he said, "Well, shortly after that, I had to see my cardiologist because of a number of things. And then he got a bunch of injuries and yada, yada, yada. And he's never been on the mat since." I thought the guy was dead. I didn't really know him. I only rolled with him a couple of times, and he disappeared. So here's the lesson I learned from that conversation yesterday. I had a brief encounter in 2019 with some dude. He's never forgotten it. He was talking about it like it was a life-changing moment for him. And so my point is this. The things that we do in life impact people around us that we're not aware of. This conversation that we've had will have impacted someone that we don't know. Later on today, the things that we do, how we represent ourselves, how we are out on social media, how we are on social media a week from now, we're representing a certain thing that someone is going to pay attention to, that they will use to make choices in their life, to gain a certain trajectory that is either positive or negative. It's our job to understand things like aggression and assertion based on our experiences. It's also our job to help others understand the nuance between the two. Don't ever misunderstand your purpose in life. Your purpose is to kick that ass, but also to explain to others how to kick that ass.
And the best explanation is through action. Is what I've learned over the years, is that you don't need to explain it, you just need to do it. People need to see you doing it. Yeah, absolutely fantastic conversation. Thank you guys so much. Quick little thing we do affect people right there. This was amazing to listen to. Thank you guys. Really appreciate it. I don't really have anything to add, so I will finish this off with the same thing. As we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see y'all next week. Chimo.
Chimo.
Hey Collective, Big Bird here. Thanks so much for watching the episode. Really appreciate the support. It has been fantastic recording these and having these conversations. I can't thank you enough. If you'd like to watch any other ones, please subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to listen to another awesome convo, I got one right here. Your choice. Chimo.